Hi, my name's Will from Project 369. We're getting to know the people that are sort of part of our network around talent, strategy, tech and services within our ecosystem. And I want to introduce Adam Krause. Adam's worked in games marketing for some 20 years around many huge games campaigns, working for the likes of major publishers, including Ubisoft, 2K, Capcom, Craft and Electronic Arts, and most recently Striking Distance Studios. Adam's recently gone and set up his own studio or his own agency, Miniboss. And so it'd be great to sort of talk to Adam today, just find out a bit more about Adam's take on the industry. So hello, Adam.
Hello, Will. Thanks for having me.
Cool. I guess the first thing was that the first question I had, which was I'd be interested in knowing, is that, I mean, there's obviously reasons why anyone's in the games industry, which is the products themselves. But I'm wondering what kind of keeps you interested in continuing to work in this space. Kind of how you like to work and what sort of drives your passion for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I thrive on the creativity in the space, not just on the marketing side of things, but I'm really inspired by the products themselves. It's something that drove me into the space in the first place, being a lifetime gamer and growing up playing video games. And so, I've always had a passion for the space and an interest in the industry. And so the deeper I've dug in, the more I've come to love it. And, in addition to that, it's also the community of people, and it's just the energy that you get out of it. So I find that to be really invigorating, and it continues to get the gears turning and, going in new creative directions, which is great.
I guess I think we're inevitably going to talk about the kind of changes that are happening in the industry. And, do you still feel some of that kind of experience now that obviously the industry is going through some pretty big changes?
The industry is definitely going through a lot right now. And I mean, I think it's safe to say this year has been a kick in the gut for a lot of people, which has been really, it's been distressing. I'm still passionate about the space. I'm still passionate about the medium. I still think that our best days continue to be ahead of us. I think that it's something very challenging right now, because we just on the larger end of the spectrum within this industry, you have a mix of consolidation and downsizing happening at the same time. And some can say that it's market corrections, some can say that it's post-COVID, and all that. But I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to speculate on that. I just know that it's tough. What I'm encouraged by, though, is I'm encouraged by the amount of talent and the amount of drive and creativity that I'm seeing like be spun up outside of this. So as companies are letting go of very talented people, a lot of these talented people are deciding to break off and do new and creative things, myself included. This is part of why I started Miniboss. I just wasn't seeing the opportunities that I was used to getting in the traditional publishing space. And I saw an opportunity for me to go out and be able to lend my skills a little bit more on a project basis. And, I've been at it for about 5 months now, and I'm really loving it. I've been talking to numerous clients about different types of challenges, and there's still that creativity and drive that, really pushes this industry forward. And for me, it's just been really refreshing being able to jump into a room and start adding immediate value by contributing new ideas, and particularly people that haven't been exposed to a lot of marketing. I've been talking to a lot of developers and folks that just haven't necessarily been in the room with some of the bigger publisher meetings when you're talking with the VP of marketing and things like that, and being able to come in and talk about the value of research and how that can guide and inform the development process and everything. And it's been very, very collaborative, and I think that that's a very refreshing component, and I do think that we'll be able to grow out of this. And so I think that this whole thing, it's definitely distressing. There's no way to sugarcoat it or say that there's a silver lining or anything, and I don't want to diminish the impact that this has had on people's lives. But, I think that 2 or 3 years from now, we are going to look back on this, and we're going to see that some really great seeds were planted that grew into something really interesting. So, I'm very, very curious, particularly with we're also at an inflection point on the technology scale right now. And you have platforms emerging like Roblox and like UEFN with Fortnite, where you have original game content that can actually be built with much smaller, more nimble teams. And then just on the traditional development focus, you have tools with AI that are being iterated on a weekly cadence right now, and it's growing at a very, very rapid rate. I do think that, 5 to 10 years from now, it's going to take a much smaller team to make a really high quality product. And that means more high quality products out in market. That means more games for players to enjoy. That means more freedom for people to be able to pursue their own creative vision without having to bow down to a giant publisher necessarily. So, and that's part of why the big publishers are consolidating as well. I think they see the writing on the wall too. So, it's definitely a turbulent time, but I'm hoping that it will turn into something great.
Yeah, a transformative phase is the way that I look at it. We had an interesting conversation earlier about an idea that I think you put a name to it, this kind of concept of a sort of distributed publishing model, which I think is probably an example of one of those areas where people are looking to kind of make these changes, possibly that are going to happen inevitably, but have been hastened maybe by the circumstances that many of these studios have find themselves in. I mean, would you be able to sort of just explain to us a little bit more about your kind of thinking behind that, and what it could do, how it could work, and the real benefits that could open up for the studios?
Yeah, I think that publishing really this is a good opportunity for us to rethink how we publish games. And I think if you look at the two different verticals of game releases, you have, on one end you have the development cycle, on the other end you have the publishing cycle. And now those fundamentally, if you're talking about a single game, fundamentally those don't match. They're not compatible, because a publishing cycle is maybe a year to a year and a half of work. But a current game right now, particularly in the AA or AAA space, has maybe 2 minimum years of development. Typically, you're seeing a lot of games that are released after 3 to 5 years of development. And so if you're only talking about a single game, it really doesn't make sense to have a full-time publishing org managing a title. And so particularly now when you have these smaller studios that are popping up that want to release their games, they're not in a position to be able to hire a full-time publishing staff, because it's just not conducive. So you'll find a lot of instances, and I've spoken with a lot of folks that are running studios right now, and they're finding this common issue where they can't afford to keep a full-time publishing staff. So what they'll tend to do is they might either do one of two things. So they'll either hire one like VP of marketing that they look at as the Swiss Army knife to do everything. And that person's just going to get burnt out right away. And they're frankly going to be overextended and not be able to do the right level of publishing that what you would expect of any team. They'd be spread way too thin. On the other end of the spectrum, you might fragment and hire a lot of junior people to manage marketing without a lot of senior leadership to be able to kind of guide them. And then there's a lot of challenges with that as well. So it's one of those things where I think that there's an opportunity to just kind of rethink the overall publishing model. And I think you could look at it more from an agency perspective, where you can actually kind of break up the overall publishing phase or the publishing cycle into 4 key phases. So first, you have your positioning. And the positioning phase is really where you develop the brand and the brand identity. You figure out who is your target market, what are your USPs, who are you speaking to, what is your sales forecast, why are you making this, and who is it for? You figure out the logo, you figure out what your key messages are going to be, and you figure out what that core positioning is to start. At that point, depending on how the dev cycle is, particularly at that early stage in the development, when typically a publishing team is doing that positioning work, it can be volatile, and you can have a game that can slip back 6 months, can slip a year or something. If you had everyone with publishing and development on the same team, if a game slips, that publishing team is just sitting there waiting for the next phase. And so that's a lot of sunk costs associated with that. So instead, after you do the positioning, you tag that team out, and then you invite them back when you're ready to move on to the next phase, which is really your go-to-market planning. And so the go-to-market planning is basically enacting all the messaging, all the positioning that you did previously, figuring out what that plan's going to be across all the verticals, be it media, PR, community, all of that. And you actually put your plan together about how you're going to go to market. And then at that point, you can potentially tag out because there's still an opportunity that the game might slip again. So you tag them out after the plan is done, but you make sure that the plan is pretty modular and it can move to any stage of the year. And that way you can easily plug back in when you need to come into the third phase. And that third phase is execution. And so when you know that the game is actually going to release, when you're committed to a launch date, when you have all of that, you basically bring that go-to-market plan back in. You can tweak it a little bit as needed based on where the timing has kind of landed. But at that point, you basically know what you need to do to execute. And so you just follow that plan. And then finally, the final phase is what would be considered post-launch. And so that's only going to mostly apply to live service games. So once you've gone through the campaign execution, then that's only half the battle if you're talking about a live service game. And so that's where you basically have to have a plan in place to be able to support that more long term. So yeah, those 4 key phases, again, that would be positioning, go to market, and then execution, and then live service. Those are really the key elements that I think would come into a more distributed publishing model. And I think the traditional publishing houses, they can support that because they have a throughput of a bunch of different games. So they can move a publishing team from one title to another if things slip. But now that things are starting to become more fragmented, you don't necessarily have that level of flexibility, particularly if these studios want autonomy where they don't want to have to become part of a big publishing org, or if they're having challenges with that. So I think that this is a service, and by looking at it this way, this kind of service agency model can provide a lot of publishing support to be able to provide high quality campaigns that get the games out to the right audiences and really give these studios the treatment that they deserve at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting idea, and it's quite useful to kind of see that sort of publishing or the marketing aspect of the publishing kind of broken down in that way. I guess there's still a job for us collectively to do within this industry to see if we can kind of, if you like, help those studios to sort of realize and grasp this opportunity, because there isn't necessarily, as we know, a kind of a go-to alternative. We're not quite clear where these kind of roles and responsibilities are going to land, and what sort of services people will come up with. Obviously, this is something which you're doing, but I just wondered if there was a sort of thought that you had around, how do you kind of help these studios to sort of take this opportunity, or to sort of move to this model? What's the sort of support do you think that they need to do? Because it's quite a big change for them.
Yeah, it is a big change. And I mean, this is part of why I'm excited about talking to you in Project 369. I think that establishing a network of different expertise that you can tap into, that's where the value is. Like, I'm going to be able to come in, I can advise on brand strategy, I can advise on growth marketing, I can do a go-to-market plan if I need to. But, I'm not the guy that's going to be running the research studies. I'm not the guy that's going to be doing the community support. So being able to have a network of other established professionals that have a high pedigree in the space and that have been doing this for a long time, so you can basically align with these folks to tag them in where you need extra support. That's kind of where I think there's a lot of opportunity. And so to answer your question about, how you get folks to latch onto this, I mean, it's really about going to conferences. It's about trying to take as many meetings as possible. It's about being vocal on social media and on LinkedIn about how things are changing and about how there's different new creative ways to think about things. I do think a lot of advocacy needs to happen, and I think that we need to be having conversations as much as possible about thinking about things a little bit differently. And particularly in light of the current market and everything that's going on here, I think this is a reckoning moment where we need to challenge the conventions that we've been accustomed to. And so, I would hope that if people are splitting off and doing their own things, number one, I wish them all the best in the world, but I also think that there likely is more of an appetite to think about doing things differently. And so I think that appetite will be what helps kind of drive this and helps grow this model.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Good advice. I think the other kind of question I wonder whether you had an angle on, I guess you're very close to some of the kind of agencies, the creative agencies that have been a big part of bringing these big campaigns that you'd have involved into life. And I guess when you look at the creative agencies and the other kind of like service suppliers to the industry, they will have to kind of deal with these changes in the games industry themselves as well. I wondered whether you had any thought about, or sort of not necessarily advice, ideas that could help those kind of companies to evolve to these
Well,
changes?
I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing kind of networks, or, I mean, for lack of a better term, alliances happening between different agencies. I think that there's media agencies out there that might not necessarily have the creative capabilities of some of the bigger creative houses, and vice versa. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you start having marketers like myself, and I've already talked to other people that are in similar positions to me, where I've spent a lot of time on the publishing side, managing teams and hiring different agencies. These folks kind of splitting off and having their preferred networks of agency partners that they kind of lean into. And so I think that kind of network is really where the value proposition is going to be. And if you have a really good relationship and a good partnership with different agencies that you could tag in on a project by project basis, that's where things are going to kind of go. But I think that the days of being the creative AOR for EA or Ubisoft, I mean, those, number one, those are very limited in general. There's only so many AORs out there. So I think that adapting to a more project focused model is going to be very critical, but a lot of that comes to networking and figuring out who you want to align with. So thankfully, I've worked with a lot of really great, amazing creative folks and great media teams as well. And so, I already am fortunate to have a lot of really great connections where, I mean, they've been throwing business my way and I'm throwing business their way. And that's kind of how things are going.
Cool. That's really good. That's really good stuff. Thanks, Adam. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess just finally, is there any question which you think you'd have liked to have been asked that we didn't cover?
Let me think. I think that I kind of touched on it, but this whole emerging space, there's a lot of opportunity, for marketers in general. And I don't know if this is going to be super relevant if we're only talking to an endemic gaming audience. But there's a lot of opportunity within Fortnite and also within Roblox, and also you have new platforms like Everywhere that are on the horizon. The UGC space is exploding, and you see a lot of venture capital moving that way right now. And so knowing that that's the case, I'm very eager to talk to other partners and other endemic players in the space. I think that there's been a lot of brand integrations that have been happening, but mostly non-endemic brands. Like, I know BMW just announced that they did a Fortnite island and stuff. I actually think there's a huge opportunity for endemic advertisers and endemic marketers and developers, particularly if you're developing in Unreal. All your assets translate to Fortnite if you really wanted to. And that's a huge audience to tap into. So, whether you're building games originally within that ecosystem and trying to explore there, or if you are just trying to market your game outside of those platforms, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And so I've been digging into that a lot, actually. And so I'm very, very fascinated about where that space is going. And yeah, if anyone in the network or anyone watching this wants to just talk about that sort of stuff, I would love to just spitball ideas, because I do think that there's a lot of promise there, particularly when these platforms become more sophisticated. They offer a lot of potential to be able to take games to market at scale and much more rapidly iterate to figure out what's successful. So I think there's a lot of promise there.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice there. Yeah, a lot of opportunity. Very interesting. Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Adam. I think we're
Awesome.
good. We'll look forward to staying in touch. Cheers.
All right. Thank you, Will.
So that was Adam Krause from Miniboss. It's great coming out of that interview and really seeing that there's a whole lot of insights there from Adam. But there's also an alignment starting to emerge between various kind of people in the games industry that are identifying the opportunities that have been created by the various changes going on. This idea of approaching games publishing in a different way and developing new services that are much more based around what Adam calls a sort of distributed network approach, but that involve a lot of collaboration between parties, is really interesting and exciting for us. So if you'd like to find out more about working with Project 369 or joining us, please do get in touch and we'll look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.